The night Dorothy watched her daughter shrink at the dinner table, she finally understood what 30 years of silence had cost her. Not just her own life. Her daughter's too. Dorothy was 52 years old, and she could read her husband's mood before he even walked through the door. A slow turn of the key meant the evening was manageable. A hard shove of the door against its frame meant trouble was coming. She had spent 3 decades learning to answer a single question the moment she heard his footsteps. How much space do I need to give him tonight? That Tuesday she had cooked with a concentration of someone diffusing something. Pot roast, root vegetables, the blue placemats, Gerald preferred. The bread already sliced so he wouldn't have to do it himself and find something to say about it. She didn't do all this out of love. Not anymore. It was something harder to name the exhaustion of walking on eggshells inside your own home until the eggshells start to feel like the floor itself. Gerald came in and dropped his jacket over a chair instead of hanging it up. Dorothy knew without looking. That sound meant he was in one of his moods. "What's this?" he said, standing over the pot roast before he'd even sat down. "Dinner," Dorothy said. Her voice had learned, over the years, to carry no sharp edges. "Looks like something from a nursing home cafeteria." She didn't answer immediately. She had learned that immediate answers could be mistaken for argument, even when they were only explanations. "I followed the same recipe. The one you said you liked." He sat down heavily. "It's dry," he said, before tasting it. Something closed quietly inside Dorothy's chest. She brought the pot to the table without a word. "There's more juice here if you want to, Dorothy." He said her name like a door shutting. "I just want to eat without a production." She sat down across from him. Her hands were red from scrubbing grout that morning. Physical work was the only kind that quieted the low hum of anxiety behind her sternum. She looked at those hands in her lap and felt something older and heavier than sadness. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came automatically, worn smooth by years of use. She wasn't even sure anymore what she was apologizing for. If something in you just tightened reading that, if you know what it feels like to say sorry without knowing why, just to keep the air from going heavy, write her voice matters in the comments, because Dorothy's story is only beginning, and what she's about to discover will change everything. If this is already reaching you, give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Gerald ate in silence, not the comfortable kind, the pressurized kind that makes you wait to find out if you've done enough. Dorothy sat present in body only, eating little, watching nothing. Later, after the dishes were done, Dorothy passed through the hallway where her mother's jewelry box sat on a low shelf. It was small, pale wood, worn, smooth at the corners, with a brass clasp gone green with age. When you opened the lid, a tiny ballerina was supposed to spin to a tinkling melody, but the mechanism had slowed years ago. Now she only managed a quarter turn before stopping, as if she'd thought better of the whole endeavor. Gerald had always called it an eyesore. Dorothy had never been able to get rid of it, because her mother Margaret had kept it on her own dresser for as long as Dorothy could remember. Some objects absorb something of the people who have loved them. Letting it go would have felt like losing Margaret a second time. Margaret had died 6 years ago, at the end of a long illness. In her last weeks, when the morphine softened the edges of things, she had looked at Dorothy with an expression that seemed to hold something urgent she didn't know how to deliver. One afternoon, while Dorothy was adjusting the blankets, Margaret gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "I wasted so much time being afraid," she said. "I hope you won't." Dorothy had thought it was the medication speaking. She smiled and changed the subject. But those words had followed her ever since, while folding laundry, while looking at her own reflection and noticing how the tiredness in her eyes had outpaced her age. What had her mother been afraid of? "Are you going to stand in the hallway all night?" Gerald's voice from the living room. Dorothy lifted her fingers from the jewelry box. "Coming," she said. That night, she lay awake beside him while he slept with the ease of a man who has never questioned whether he was living his life correctly. She thought of the photography class she had enrolled in and quietly withdrawn from, because Gerald said it was a waste of money. The weekend trip to visit an old friend that had never happened, because Gerald said he didn't like her being away. The slow narrowing of her world, year by year, which she had allowed and called compromise. She had not yet called it anything worse than that. The evening that changed everything came 2 months later, on a Sunday in early October. Dorothy had cooked carefully. Her daughter Claire was coming with her boyfriend Ryan, and there was glazed chicken, roasted potatoes, a salad with walnuts and cranberries, and a lemon cake. because Claire had mentioned once, years ago, that lemon cake was her favorite. Claire was 29. She had her grandmother's dark eyes and a way of making herself smaller in certain company that Dorothy recognized too well. Since childhood, she had looked at her father before forming an opinion. Since adolescence, she had apologized for things that didn't require apology. Dorothy had always told herself her daughter was simply considerate. She had not let herself use other words. Ryan was 31. Well-dressed, the kind of man who arrives with a firm handshake and an opinion about everything. Gerald liked him immediately. They spoke the same language, the language of men who believe their certainty is wisdom. Lunch went smoothly at first. Then Gerald turned the conversation, as he often did when comfortable, toward women. The problem today is nobody wants to commit to anything, he said. Women, especially. Everyone wants to be independent and then wonders why nothing lasts. Ryan nodded. Women lead with emotion. It's just how it is. Doesn't always make for sound decision-making. Dorothy looked at Claire. Her daughter had her eyes on her plate. She didn't say she held a demanding job and did it excellently. She didn't push back against the casual reduction of herself in every woman she knew. She just sat with a particular stillness, the stillness of someone who decided long ago that speaking up costs more than it returns. And then Dorothy saw it. Not just Claire at that table. She saw Claire at 8 years old, watching a mother apologize for a dinner that needed no apology. She saw Claire at 15, lowering her voice whenever Gerald entered a room. She saw the woman her daughter was becoming, careful, capable, slowly learning to take up less space, and she understood she was not watching a coincidence. She was watching a lesson she had taught without knowing she was teaching it. Her silence had not been neutral. It had been a curriculum. Dorothy sat through the rest of lunch without speaking, but something inside her had shifted in a way that would not shift back. That night, after everyone had gone and Gerald had fallen asleep, Dorothy went to the hallway and sat on the floor beside the jewelry box. Inside the velvet compartment, she found a folded piece of paper she had read only twice before and chosen not to think about. She opened it now, her mother's handwriting, small and trembling. If I taught you to endure what you should have changed, I'm sorry. I only knew what I knew. I hope you'll learn something I didn't. She had read those words after Margaret's funeral and placed them back in the box, telling herself it was a general sentiment. She heard them differently now. She pressed her hand to her mouth and wept for Margaret, who had folded herself small inside her marriage and called it grace. For Claire, who at 29 was already fluent in the language of self, and for herself, for the photography class and the missed trip and 30 years of practiced smallness she had mistaken for love. The next morning, Gerald said the orange juice was warm. The old reflex rose in Dorothy. The apology, the offered solution. She let it pass. There's ice in the freezer, she said. Gerald lowered his glass. Excuse me. If you want it cold, there's ice in the freezer. He stared at her as if he'd reached for a familiar door handle and found it had been moved. Dorothy rinsed her cup and set it in the rack. Her hands weren't quite steady, but something had been returned to her, something she recognized as hers. In the weeks that followed, she began moving quietly toward a different life. She found her own documents in a box at the back of the closet. She opened a bank account at a branch across town. She found a weekly support group run by a social worker named Sandra, silver-haired and unhurried. The kind of woman who has heard most things and is surprised by very little. Dorothy went 3 weeks before she spoke. When she finally did, she said she wasn't sure she had a right to be there. Her husband had never hit her. Sandra let the silence sit before responding. Pain doesn't need to break the skin to be real, and a cage doesn't need bars you can see. That sentence rearranged something in Dorothy's interior. She started, slowly and incompletely, to name what had been done to her. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening. Gerald had learned she was attending the group and was waiting in the kitchen. I want you to stop going to those meetings. Dorothy set her bag on the table. I'm not going to stop. He said she was embarrassing herself, being influenced by bitter women who wanted to tear apart good families. Dorothy felt afraid. She wanted to be honest about that, but she had spent 30 years being afraid in that house, and the fear of staying was beginning to outweigh the fear of leaving. I am not something you manage, she said. I am a person who lives here. She slept in the guest room that night. She didn't take it back. 4 weeks later, she left, a small bag, her documents, the jewelry box, a photograph of Claire at 12, mid-laugh, on a summer afternoon. Gerald told her from the front step that she would regret it. Dorothy understood she didn't need to say anything back. Leaving was the sentence. Everything else was commentary. She drove away without looking back. The first weeks in Helen's small rented room were harder than she expected. She woke, disoriented, made coffee feeling like an apologetic guest in her own life. She cried more than she wanted to, not only from grief, but from the strangeness of having removed the structure she had organized herself around for 30 years, even one that had been hurting her. A person can grow around a wound the way a tree grows around a nail. When the nail is removed, something still aches in the shape of it. She didn't go back. She enrolled in an evening equivalency course at the library and found work cleaning offices in a medical complex. She showed up on time, worked methodically, noticed everything. After 2 months, the facilities coordinator, Patricia, called her in. I have an opening in medical records. It requires attention to detail and reliability. You've shown me you have both. The old reflex almost surfaced, the impulse to talk herself smaller before someone else could. She caught it before it left her mouth. I'd like to hear more, she said instead. She got the position. On the first day she was given a badge. Dorothy Ellison, medical records, administrative coordinator. She went to the bathroom on her break and held it under the fluorescent light and let herself feel what it meant. Not the title, the proof. Proof that the voice she had been living inside for 30 years, the one that said she wasn't capable and her mind had nothing useful to offer, was simply wrong. She called Claire that evening. I got promoted, she said, trying to sound casual. Mom. Claire's voice went soft. That's incredible. Something in the telling. The way Claire listened. The warmth of being genuinely seen by her own daughter opened a space between them that had been closed for years. They began spending Sunday afternoons together. Coffee. Slow. Conversation. Things they were circling without quite naming. Ryan was always there between the sentences, calling every hour, checking where Claire was and who she'd spoken to. One afternoon, after the third call in 90 minutes, Dorothy set down her cup. A person who loves you doesn't keep score of your hours. Claire stiffened. He's nothing like Dad. Dorothy didn't argue. A person doesn't let go of a belief just because someone pulls at it. She has to start seeing it herself. 6 weeks later, Claire showed up unannounced on a Wednesday night with red eyes and a bag over her shoulder. Dorothy opened the door and stepped aside without a word. He told me that if I apply for the artist residency, it means I'm looking for a reason to leave him. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. Dorothy sat beside her. What do you want, Claire? I want to apply. I want to make something that's mine. I want to stop asking permission to care about things. I owe you an apology, Dorothy said. Claire looked up. Because I let you watch me disappear and called it being a good wife. I thought I was protecting the family. What I was really doing was showing you what love was supposed to look like. I can't undo that. But I can tell you now, love does not require you to be less. Claire cried then. The deep kind of crying that has been waiting a long time for permission. Dorothy held her and didn't try to fix anything or speed anything up. 2 weeks later, Claire called. She had met Ryan in the park and told him about the residency. He had done what he always did. Dismantled her judgment calmly, with confidence. And Claire had listened with a strange new clarity, the way you sometimes hear a familiar song and suddenly understand what the words mean. I told him I was applying, Claire said, and then I told him I was leaving. How are you? Scared. Also like I can breathe. That sounds exactly right, Dorothy said. Dorothy finished her equivalency degree the following spring, in a community room with folding chairs and a banner in a font slightly too large for the space. When they called her name, she walked to the front with the composure of someone who has spent a long time not believing this moment was possible. She thought of Margaret, who had been taught that a certain level of education was enough. She thought of Claire, who would be accepted to her residency 3 months later. She thought of herself at 20, handing her life to someone else to direct. She let herself feel the weight of the years she couldn't reclaim, and then let it go. They were not the measure of her life. They were its history, and she was still writing. She ran to a small apartment with south-facing windows that filled the living room with light. On the windowsill, her mother's jewelry box, her diploma in a simple frame, a photograph of herself and Claire, both smiling. At the dinner celebrating all of it, there was wine, laughter, and the warmth of a table where everyone present had chosen to be there. Later, after the guests left, Dorothy opened the jewelry box one last time. She placed the note deeper inside beneath the velvet tray, in a place where it would be there if anyone ever needed to find it. She stood at the window with Claire beside her, looking out at the city. "She would have been proud of you," Claire said. "She meant Margaret." "I think she was just trying to get us somewhere better," Dorothy said. "And I think we're getting there." Outside, the evening continued in its ordinary way. Inside, a woman who had spent 30 years learning to take up less space was learning at last to take up the right amount. And that was not nothing. It was everything. Thank you for staying with Dorothy all the way to the end. If her story moved something in you, if you found yourself thinking of someone you love, or quietly recognizing something of your own life in hers, tell me in the comments. Even a single word is enough. And if you think this story deserves to reach someone who might need it today, please give it a like and share it with them. Stories like Dorothy's don't end when the video does. They keep living in the people who carry them forward. I'll see you in the next one.